I'm Nate Spack, and I'm presenting on Chapter 2, Segment 1 of the Principles of Psychology textbook. So, psychology is a science. The prevailing thought from the mid-20th century and before is that men were superior to women as overall musicians. And in the 1960s, musicians began to play their instruments behind a screen for judges in auditioning, and these were called blind auditions. As a result of these blind auditions, more women were hired since the judges were unaware of the musician's sex and thus unable to incorporate bias into their decision as to whether or not to hire. Now, what constitutes a science? Now, scientists know that we can never prove anything to be completely true. However, we can prove explanations untrue, and a few elements of the scientific method clearly involved in psychology include variables, which are factors which change along with the behavior of interest in the study. Hypotheses are then developed as an explanation to why these variables and a behavior may co-vary, and then experiments are developed in order to test a hypothesis. Now, science begins with the careful observation of phenomena, and psychology is no different because it involves observing animal behavior. A few methods of this observation include the descriptive method, which involves making observations with the goal of fairly and accurately describing and recording behaviors without influencing them. Naturalistic observation, which involves descriptive studies of a species in its natural environment. A few examples include children on a playground or adults in a singles bar. And the main advantage of these naturalistic observations is that you know the behavior actually takes place. Case studies, another form of observation. These are careful observations of one or more individuals who exhibit a certain behavior which oftentimes poses a problem for them or other people. And usually these happen to be attempts to help the participants overcome their problems as well. And usually these case studies report the treatments the participants tried. And lastly, we have surveys. These are methods of observation which consist of people answering questions concerning their behavior, thoughts, or opinions via paper, internet, phone, or even face-to-face interviews in some instances. The main disadvantage of surveys, however, is that people may report something differently than how they actually behave because of the social stigma against certain behaviors. And these answers in these surveys may also heavily depend on how the questions are worded. So if a question is worded two completely different ways, but it's in essence the same question, then you may get two different answers despite the question asking for the same thing, same answer. We can also measure how closely two variables vary together. This is known as covariance when two variables vary together in a predictable fashion. For example, kids who watch more television don't read much. These obviously vary together predictably because kids who are glued to the TV tend to not have an interest in reading. And we can also tell how two variables covary by plotting the data on a scatter plot. Now, the correlation coefficient is a quantitative measure of how two variables vary together. And Pearson's correlation coefficient is a measure of correlation represented by R, and it ranges from negative 1.0 to 1.0. And the greater the absolute value of R, the greater the correlation between two variables. However, correlation does not mean that one variable has any effect on the other whatsoever, and here's where we get spurious correlations, which are instances in which two variables happen to covary and they have no causal relationship with each other whatsoever. For example, negative correlation existed between U.S. highway fatalities and the number of lemons imported into the U.S. from Mexico at one point. Obviously, these two have nothing to do with each other. It just happens that they correlate. And confounding variables, however, are factors which cause two variables which have no impact on each other to covary. An example of this would be the increase in temperature in the summer impacting ice cream sales and drownings. Ice cream sales and drownings are probably going to increase in the summer because more people are eating cold ice cream, more people are drowning because more people are swimming, and these are both due to the increase in temperature. However, ice cream sales and drownings have nothing to do with each other. Now, one last note, correlation coefficients aren't always helpful, as seen in cases where the relationship between the data is not linear, and also they don't give the whole picture when a study involves two different types of participants. I'm Nate Spack, and that was my presentation.